Hello everyone. Today in my lecture I am going to give an introduction about intellectual property rights. I am Dr. Dilshad Shaik, Professor and Dean, School of Law, Satyabama Institute of Science and Technology, deemed to be University. Before getting into the arena of intellectual property rights, one need to know the meaning of the term property. Property has a very wide meaning in its real sense, and it not only includes financial wealth and the tangible and intangible property also. So, these tangibles and intangibles can be anything that can serve as a source of income or wealth. Tangible and intangible property need to be understood in its very sense. The term tangible property refers to any type of property that can generally be moved or touched or even felt. Now, in general, it includes items such as furniture, clothing, jewelry, art, writings, etc. Intangible property, on the other hand, refers to some personal property that cannot actually be moved, touched, or felt, but instead it represents something of value, such as negotiable instruments, securities, services, and intangible assets, including a chosen action. Now that we have understood in broad terms what is property, let us focus on what is intellectual property. Intellectual property has assumed vital role with the advent of various new technologies and means of distributing intellectual works during the later half of the 20th century. Most notably, the digital technology and the decoding of genetic structure and medical innovation have raised fundamental questions about the rationale, implications, and appropriate scope of intellectual property protection. And as a result of intellectual property law have increasingly come into question and have sparked growing social, economic, political, and philosophical interest. Intellectual property is a frequently used term without a particular concrete definition, and these days it has become a buzz term. Intellectual property law principally embodies utilitarian precepts such as promoting technological innovation like patents, trademarks, or trade secrets rather, spurring creative expression like copyright, and preventing confusion in the marketplace in the form of trademark. Although brands of intellectual property law also reflect natural rights, personhood, and other philosophical perspectives. Intellectual property rights are the legal rights that protect creations and or inventions resulting from intellectual activity in the industrial, scientific, literary, or artistic fields. Intellectual property rights have been defined as ideas, innovations, and creative expressions based on which there is a public willingness to bestow the status of property. Intellectual property rights provide certain exclusive rights to the inventors or creators of that property in order to enable them to reap commercial benefits from their creative efforts or reputation. In short, intellectual property rights refers to the legal rights given to the inventor or creator to protect his invention or creation for a certain period of time. These legal rights confer an exclusive right to the inventor or creator or his assignee to fully utilize the invention or the creation for a given period of time. It is very well settled that intellectual property play a vital role in the modern economy. Intellectual property protection and enforcement is heavily affected by international treaties and multilateral agreements and their resulting harmonization of national laws. Many of these cutting edge intellectual property issues are addressed on an international level through the World Intellectual Property Organization, popularly known as WIPO, WIPO. The importance of intellectual property was first recognized in the Paris Convention for the protection of industrial property, that is in the year 1883, and Berne Convention for the protection of literary and artistic works in 1886. Both treaties are administered by the World Intellectual Property Organization. World Intellectual Property Organization is an organization of the United Nations, and the activities of this organization are of four kinds: registration, promotion of intergovernmental cooperation in the administration of intellectual property rights, specialized program activities, and also dispute resolution facilities. Along with new forms of protection, the trend towards globalization in the trade arena has had a direct effect on the harmonization of national intellectual property laws through the World Trade Organization and regional trade organizations. Needless to say that strengthened intellectual property regime annexed to the World Trade Organization is a propeller of economic growth. Intellectual property rights and their classification need to be understood by the viewers. So to understand this, under the intellectual property law, the owners of such intangible property have been granted and conferred with certain exclusive rights over their respective intangible assets or works. These include musical, literary, and artistic works, discoveries and inventions, and words, phrases, symbols, and designs, etc. Patent, trademark, copyright, and designs rights. These are the broad four main categories of intellectual property. Through the domain of such assets is expanding with passage of time. Now, let us look at the different types of intellectual property. Intellectual property protection can be sought for a variety of intellectual efforts, including patents. A patent is awarded for an invention which satisfies the criteria of global novelty, non obviousness, and industrial or commercial application. Industrial designs relates to features of any shape, configuration, surface pattern, composition of lines and colors applied to an article, whether 2D, 3D, example like even for a toothpaste, etc. The other category of intellectual property is trademarks. It relates to any mark, name, or logo under which trade is conducted for any product or service and by which the manufacturer or the service provider is identified. Trademarks can be bought, sold, and licensed, and trademarks has no existence apart from the goodwill of the product or service it symbolizes. Another category of intellectual property is copyright. It relates to the expressions of ideas or that is in material form, that may be literary, musical, dramatic, artistic, cinematography work, and of course it can even be a computer software. Geographical indications are indications which identify as good as originating in the territory of a country or a region or locality in the territory where a given quality, reputation, or other characteristics of the good is essentially attributable to its geographical origin. The other category of intellectual property is layout design of semiconductor integrated circuit. Layout design means three-dimensional disposition of the elements in which at least one element is active and or some or all having interconnections as an integrated circuit, or such a three-dimensional disposition prepared for an integrated circuit planned for industrial manufacturing. However, the scope and definition of intellectual property is constantly evolving with the inclusion of newer forms under the ambit of intellectual property. In recent times, protection of plant varieties and undisclosed information have been brought under the umbrella of intellectual property. The intellectual property rights are territorial rights by which owner can sell, buy, or license his intellectual property similar to that of a physical property. Although one has to register intellectual property at a legal authority in some presentable or tangible form to claim their benefits, each type of intellectual property right gives special rights to its inventor and or creator to sustain and harvest economic benefits, which further motivates skill and social development or societal developments rather. It is true that the modern global society is propelled forward by the power of ideas and the wavelength of those ideas. All of its aspects, and especially the economy, it is heavily dependent on the nature and uniqueness of the ideas. Such ideas had a far reaching propensity to drive a dynamic society forward, and that driving force resulted in the prominence of intellectual property rights and the laws relating to intellectual property. Let us look into the Indian scenario regarding intellectual property rights. India announced its first national intellectual property rights policy in the year 2016. Patents, designs, trademarks, copyright, geographical indications, and semiconductor integrated circuit layout design all fall under the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade, popularly known as DPIIT. Under DPIIT, the cell for IPR promotion and management, it is tasked with implementing India's national intellectual property rights policy. It spearheads the Indian government's efforts to streamline intellectual property processes, increase intellectual property awareness, promote commercialization, and also enhance enforcement. Our country has laws covering almost all types of intellectual property rights and enforcement procedures. The legislative process is often lengthy and uncertain, and the same issues can remain pending for many years. So, this can create uncertainty for industries and complicate their strategic intellectual property enforcement decisions. It is obvious that management of intellectual property and intellectual property rights is a multidimensional task and calls for many different actions and strategies which need to be aligned with national laws and international treaties and practices. Intellectual property and its associated rights are seriously influenced by the market needs, market response, cost involved in translating intellectual property into commercial ventures, and also many more. While there has been some progress, but the weak enforcement of the intellectual property by the courts and a lack of familiarity with the investigative techniques and the absence of a centralized intellectual property enforcement agency, all these have actually combined with failure to coordinate actions on both the national and state level. This is a threat to undercut the progress that actually our country can easily achieve when these have been diluted. Thank you all for your patience listening. Thank you.